that you are all here. It's kind of interesting. We did this conference last year, and there was kind of us four guys, and we put it together, and it was all people from our four churches, which was really cool, but this is really nice to have people from all sorts of different kinds of churches, all sorts of different contexts. So I'm really happy that you were here. So basically what I'm going to talk about today is stage presence. I don't know what you thought you were getting into when I said leading from the stage. There's a lot of different things that we could talk to, but the thing I want to talk to you mostly about is stage presence. And I think this is something that we don't talk about. We want to appear to not be vain. We want to pretend that it doesn't matter what we look like while we lead worship, because people should be focusing on God. And I agree with that as well. But it matters what you look like. I know that sounds silly, and it might sound vain, but I am silly and vain, and it matters what you look like. So my premise is that your job is to lead people into worship with as few distractions as possible. Right now, we live in a world where there are distractions out the wazoo. Right now in this room, there are a bunch of distractions. I think it's about 5 degrees too warm in here. This light is buzzing. My phone keeps going off. And there's just things going on. You know what I mean? All the time. There's all sorts of different distractions. If you didn't notice the light, now you will. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's my bucket.
So our job as worship leaders is to lead people to the throne of God through worship, through music, through media, with as few distractions as possible. And as much as we like to think that people don't look at us, they really do. As much as we want to pretend that people don't even know who we are, you know probably from someone seeing you at McDonald's or seeing you somewhere else, you say, hey, you go to that church, right? That's because you were on stage. They know you. So I have an embarrassing story about this. So one time when I was in high school, I'm from Central Illinois. I'm originally from Springfield, Illinois. And I went to a fairly large church, and I was lucky, and I was in high school, and they allowed me to lead worship on the praise team. Mostly because they needed guys who could sing, and because my worship minister was kind of a mentor of mine. He was a great guy. Well, I would sing, and I would lead, and I would do two things actually, that I didn't know I ever did. Until somebody finally came up to me and said, CJ, you're driving us all crazy. We can't handle it. And they said, first of all, we had wireless mics. They said, pick a hand. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, you do this thing where like every 30 seconds you switch what hand the mic is in, and then you switch again, and then you switch your hand again. They're like, you're driving us all crazy. We counted like 23 times just during the service that you switched hands. The other thing was my worship hand. Now, my friends in Bible college actually still make fun of me about this because I still do this. But when I get really into worship and I'm leading and I'm just singing, I get my hand going, and I can leave it up there for a really long time, and I don't even notice it. Like for me, it's part of the way I lead people. It's part of the way what's going. But one of my the lady I interned under, she said, CJ, what do you do when you want people to stop and you're like directing traffic? And I said, well, you usually hold your hand up like this. She said, yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. And she's like, unintentionally, you're holding your hand up and telling people to stop. And I was like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. But because I wasn't cognizant of the way I looked and the way I had presence on stage, people were reacting to me in a way that I didn't want them to. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, and I want you... so here's the lesson. I had the right idea. I was into worship. I wasn't paying attention what I was doing. I was worshiping. But what I was doing was distracting people from worshiping. So what I was doing was actually leading them away from what I wanted them to do. So stage presence is important. So all of you go to church, and you've all seen other people lead worship. So I want to do something that might be a little uncomfortable for some of our leaders. But I want to just go around the room. I want to just a few examples. What are some weird things that people at your church do while they're leading worship? Does anybody have anything? She does. She's got one.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
So
we have this guy who has buggy eyes.
Okay.
And so while he's singing, I'll go.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do not.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
you'll notice it now.
I know.
Anything else?
Not at my current church,
Yeah.
but
You know what I'm talking about?
we had a
Really?
lady that she was
I thought you
kind
said.
of a swayer, and she would kind of twist, which was okay, except she always wore these really full peasant skirts, and it was kind of
Too much movement.
Too swaying.
well, it was like she was trying to twirl like a little 5-year-old ballerina, and so the skirt would go up a little bit, and she would twirl this way and then twirl this way, and it just was a lot.
That's funny.
I think one of the weirdest things is people who aren't looking at people
Uh-huh.
when they're singing.
Yep.
And that distracts the heck out of me when I'm a worshiper, is when they're not making any eye contact with anybody. You know, that I don't get that. I don't get what you're thinking if you're not looking at the people in the front row or whoever, or pretending you're looking at somebody. I don't, you know, you can't always see, but I think that's
Yeah, and I don't like it when people close their eyes,
Oh, yeah.
because I think
That
they
is-
should be
that's
connecting with people.
That's a thing. That's a debate, I would say.
Mhm.
There's I'm a people watcher, so I notice these kinds of things. We had a really good friend of mine in college, and her name was Vicky, and we called it the Vicky who sway. She did this move. Every song, no matter how fast or slow, it was this move. She'd sing, and she'd
so you're
sleep.
doing the big.
And I did it every time. And it was just like, okay, stand still, stop moving. And I love her dearly. And I would say probably all the people that you mentioned, all good people, all good hearts, nothing intentional. They're not trying to be distracting, but when you get up there, you're like, oh no, here they go. All right, there goes a Vicky. Okay, all right, back and forth. All right. So regardless of the kind of church you're in, regardless of the style of worship, it's important for you to have good stage presence. I think that's I've established that maybe. So I'm going to talk about 4 things that I think make up good stage presence. Now, some of these you may not think are as relevant as others, but I think they all need to be addressed. First of all, there's what you're wearing. There's your dress. Secondly, there's your posture. There are your facial expressions, like Mr. Buggy Eyes. And fourthly, what do I do with my hands? You know what I mean? So first of all, I want to talk about dress. And I know this is kind of a tricky subject. I'm not trying to be a mean person at all. And this is all in the eye of the beholder. And I know that each church has its own style and its own dress code. I know some of your churches are probably going to be very formal, suit and tie and dress. Some of your churches are going to be maybe, what I call country club casual. You get your Dockers and your khakis and your polos. And like the church I go to now is very much like, this would almost be a little dressed up at our church because I have a buttoned up shirt. But that's just each church is different. And that's fine. I just have 2 guidelines when I always talk to my people about dress. Number 1, you don't want to look sloppy. And number 2, you don't want to be distracting. I'm going to say distracting a lot. You don't want to look sloppy, and you don't want to be distracting. So I'm going to start talking about distracting first. And I don't want to be a prude, I don't want to be that guy, but everybody knows when someone is dressed distractingly. You've all seen the lady at church that might have come in like she just came in from the nightclub the night before. Like, I hope you have those people at your church. Her top might be too low, her skirt might be too high, those kinds of things. And I want you to be careful to listen to what I'm saying. If that lady is just here at your church, praise God that she's there. Because a lot of times those people that are coming, they don't know that they're not maybe supposed to wear those things, or they don't know that that's inappropriate. And so they're wearing the best clothes that they have. And so they're there. So if they're at your church, don't you dare say a word to them. Unless they're like your daughter or somebody that should have.
You can break.
Then you do that at home. But don't you dare say a word to that person, because like Josh talked about this morning, they're here to hear what the church is saying. And it probably took a lot of guts for that person to walk into your church to begin with. So just let them be and say, good morning, how are you? And would you like a jacket? No, I'm kidding. However, there's a difference between being at the church and being on stage at church. There are some rules, and you shouldn't be distracting. So, the arm rule, if your skirt or your shorts or your pants or whatever is shorter than your arms, you probably shouldn't wear it, and you shouldn't be too distracting. Just a second, let me go to my next page. And these rules, these apply to guys as well, okay? So I don't want to just be, shaming the ladies. You've all seen that hipster worship leader whose pants are way too tight, or the guy who's working out a lot and wants to show it off, So you shouldn't be able to tell guys if it's really cold in the room. That's all I'm saying through your t-shirt. But that joke fell flat, but all right. If you wear something that is too distracting, people aren't going to pay attention to what you're doing. They're going to pay attention to you. I always used to say this, we always used to do Christmas programs. And I always said, ladies, we did a choir thing. We'd all have them kind of wearing something coordinating, like all black. So ladies, not a lot of jewelry. I don't want any of those Christmas-like blinking necklaces, no Christmas bows on you. Not because it looks dumb, even though it does kind of. But it's more that you don't want to be distracting from what everything else is going on. It's not about you, it's about leading people into worship. So you don't want to be distracting. But the other thing is you don't want to look sloppy. And I think this is a little bit trickier. When I was in college, I worked at a church plant for 2 years, real small church. We started with like 35 people, and we grew, and it was a great experience. But one of my guys who liked to sing, who I had sing with me, he was really excited that he was now part of a church that didn't have like a real dress code. We were pretty casual, pretty informal. And one Sunday, I'll never forget this, he comes in, he was kind of, more of a country guy. He comes in like tattered up jeans and a sweatshirt with a giant like airbrushed wolf picture on the front. Like, have you seen these? Like the really ugly like wolf. I was in college, I was like 19, and I had no idea what to say to this guy. But Amy was like, my wife, who's now my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, she was like, why did you let that guy up in front of people? And I was like, well, I mean, he's, a nice guy, and he's part of our church. And she said, I couldn't pay attention to a word you're saying because that wolf was just staring at me the whole time. And it wasn't that he was dressed, distractingly, even though it was because he was sloppy. He looked like he had just come in from working on his car. And again, while that's fine if they're just coming to your church, if you're going to put them in front of people, they need to look presentable. And I don't want to make a big issue out of this because I understand different people make different kinds of money. But when people look to get put together and when they don't. So if you have to ask a guy, hey, can you tuck in your shirt? Or can you smooth out your clothes? That's fine because the way that they look is important. So now that we've gotten past that vanity part, I want to talk a little bit about your posture. This is something that I don't think people talk about as much. And sometimes it's difficult because people are shaped differently or they just stand differently. You know how it is. But posture really is important because it projects an attitude about how you feel. So for example, at Milford, I had a lady who, and she had some back issues. And so it was hard for her sometimes to stand. We would do rehearsal, then we had 2 worship services. It was hard for her to stand for a long period of time. But she stood a lot like she had her shoulders hunched in, she was kind of bent over, she would hold her mic like this and just sing kind of at the floor. And while I understand it was difficult, she had some back issues, this posture says a lot about what you're doing. This posture says, boy, I hope people don't see me up here. I really want to sing, but I hope they don't see me up here. So posture is really important. When you're on stage, as much as it's not about you, you want to have stage presence. Does that make sense? You want to know that you are there on purpose and that you didn't just somehow wander up the stairs and onto the stage and what you're doing. So when I'm on stage, I try to stand with my feet firmly planted, my shoulders back, my chest out a little bit, and a nice confident presence that I know what I'm doing. I'm here, I've practiced, I'm ready for you to come, and I'm ready to present something to you. Does that make sense? So you don't want to stand hunched over. You don't want to stand like this. You never really kind of stand with your knees together because you might pass out too, and you don't want to do that. It's just about having a commanding presence and about letting people know non-verbally, I'm happy you're here. We're excited you've come to worship with us. I know what I'm doing, and let's enter into this thing together. Does that make sense? Okay. Are there any questions on that, just on posture?
Are you going to address just general movement
Mhm.
of, okay.
Yep.
Good.
One posture note, and
Yeah.
it may be a pet peeve, but when you put all your weight on one leg and kind of cock your head.
Yep.
That, to me, that's the sloppy posture as much as sloppy dress. Because, that teenager, I've got an attitude kind of.
And it's a really good way to fall over too. You know what I mean? And I've done this in front of people, and you try to and it's always when you think nobody's looking, but sometimes I have a bad habit of walking around when I sing. And I usually do a front to back walk around. And some of you may notice this when you do this. Some of you go side to side. And you may not even realize that. You go side to side, and you sing to this side of the room first, and then you turn and you sing to that side of the room. I tend to go front to back. Well, some things, what I do is I'll get my foot on one side, and then I'll accidentally, because I'm focusing on what I'm saying, I'll accidentally get my foot twisted around like something like this, and I will go, okay, all right, you know. So it is important to try to stay where you are and to remain on both feet. That's a good point. Okay, very cool. Let me address what you're talking about moving around. So moving around on stage is difficult. The way I always approach my worship leading is I want to release my people to do what they do in the best way they do it. I want them to have fun. I want them to have a great experience. And I want them to really enjoy what they're doing. So I don't necessarily say, this is your spot. You have X number of feet. Do not deviate from that space. Do not move. Just stand there and sing and move off. Like, I don't think anybody would do that. And if you are, stop me. That's not nice. So moving around is difficult. How many of you are vocalists? Sing on the vocal team? Most of you are. Do you lead with guitar or do you sing?
Say that again.
Do you lead with the guitar or do you sing?
I lead with the guitar.
Okay. So this is a little bit different when you're playing at an instrument or when you're singing. So when you're singing and you just have your mic, and this I was going to get to when talking about what to do with my hands. How many of you have cordless mics? Anybody? How many of you have corded mics? Do you have a cord?
Corded.
Okay. This is a pet peeve of mine. You may disagree with me. This hand is for holding your mic. This hand is not for holding your cord. You don't need to hold your cord. Just let it go. Just let it, because this is so like 1984. Like, I got my cord in this hand and my mic in this hand, and I don't have to worry about what to do with my hands because I'm holding on. But you're holding your mic and you're moving around. Like I said, you want to feel free to move with the music. You want to know that, let people in the congregation know that you are not dead or a robot, that you move with the music. You want to communicate to the whole room, if that makes sense. But you have to be careful not to pick a spot, sing a song. Pick a spot, sing. You know what I mean? Am I making sense? Okay. I have a hard time sometimes. I have like ADHD a little bit, so sometimes I think I'm tracking really well, and people just give me this look like, where's he going? So while you're moving around, you want to feel free to move with the music, but you want to maintain your space. Does that make sense? I think most of you have large enough spaces that kind of the vocal team is at one spot and the band is at another spot, and you kind of are arranged in such a way so that it looks nicely. And usually your worship leader will do that. But you want to sort of maintain your space and not move around too much. Does that make sense? Is that clear? And you want to be, more than anything, cognizant of what you're doing. Like I talked about my friend Vicky. She had no idea that she was doing this.
I think I might be a Vicky, I'm not sure.
Are you? Yeah.
I'm not sure. On certain songs, I think I might sway and move, and I don't even know I'm doing
Right.
it.
She had no idea. I even asked her about it one time. She said, I don't do that. I said, Vicky, everybody knows you do this. I said, everybody knows you do this. I said, you just don't pay attention to it. So you want to just, while you are in the moment and while you are worshiping, you are, first and foremost, you are leading. And you are in front of people. And so you need to be cognizant of what your body is doing and how you are moving. It's the same way with my hand, with the worship hand. I have to be really careful about this. Because sometimes it just happens naturally. I'm feeling a song, so I'm feeling a real part of it. If you would have stood by me upstairs earlier, you would have, don't sit on my left side because you might get hit in the head. So, but when I'm leading, I have to be really cognizant that I'm not doing this every single song, the same move every single time. Because after a while, it does get distracting. So you just want to be really cognizant of what your body's doing, be really present in what's going on. As much as it is important for you to be in the worship, your primary task in that moment is to lead people into worship. And if you're being distracting or if you're being, confusing, then that won't help people lead. Anybody have questions on that? Disagree with what I'm saying? Yes.
I feel like it's a very fine line
Yes. Mm-hmm. It is.
because like what you're saying about your hand raising, that wouldn't bother me at all.
Right.
Like I would think, bless him for being free in his worship.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you know, the struggle I think as a leader is if you have people that are doing things, like, to me, you would have to be doing something really huge
Right.
for me to feel like it was a distraction.
Mhm.
But if I were to go to somebody who, you know, that girl's natural thing is just to do this thing from
Mhm.
side to side, I have now put a distraction in her way as a leader
Mhm.
because now she's going to be thinking about that every time she gets on that stage.
Right.
So,
And that is, and as the worship
Yeah.
leader, as the minister of that area, that is the challenge. You know what I mean? I tend to err on the not saying anything side, to be 100% honest
I mean,
with you.
truly, unless I feel like it's a huge distraction.
Yeah, unless it's
Probably not.
majorly distracting, I
Mhm.
tend to not err. I tend to err on the don't say anything side. When I do say something, though, first of all, you have to come out of it in a relationship with that person. You know what I mean? And so that they know, look, I care for you. I care about you. I value you as part of my team. I
Right.
want you here.
Right.
But you may not be aware of this thing that you do that can be distracting. And the thing you don't ever say, though, is, I've had a lot of people say that this is distracting.
Oh, yeah.
Because that will make them paranoid and crazy. So at the very least, at the end of that conversation, they may dislike you, but not everybody else. You know what I mean? So I think there is as the leader, there is a fine line there. But I really do believe that when you put somebody on the stage, their primary role is as the worship leader. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so if they're sometimes thinking about that, and you know what I mean? Like, that's okay, because they're leading the majority of the people in worship, and that person isn't likely going to be up there every single week. So they have their time to worship on their own. So on those few Sundays a month or a year when they do get up and lead, they can focus on leading and not being distracted. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And some of it's contextual, that
Mm-hmm.
one person may be doing something that's not distracting, but when you look at them compared to the person standing next to them who's not doing anything,
Right.
you know, if they're the
And
person
won't
that's
do
hunched over,
anything. Right.
or is just very subdued in that moment, it's like, I can't stop watching this person. And not because it's too much, it's just, it's more than the person next to them,
Mhm.
your whole stage view.
Mhm. Sometimes you get what I call the concrete block singers. They just and they don't do anything else, and that's fine. Especially in more, I would say, traditional, more reserved congregations. That's the case.
This kind of speaks to that. I feel like, I mean, I've gone to church here for a very long time, and so we've transitioned a lot in what worship looked like, which probably lots of churches have.
Yeah.
And I feel like the thing that is so distracting to me when I'm out there is the person who is not moving at all, because I feel like they're not into it, that like they're not really into the song, or they're not, and that's my interpretation. But do
Right.
you actually, you know, as a leader, I feel like it's better if everybody's kind of on the same page with we're all moving a little bit, or we're
A
not
lot of
moving
it.
at all on
Right.
this particular song. We are going to be cement blocks because we just want that image, or, you know.
Yeah.
Do you go there as a leader? Like, do you actually orchestrate that? Do you actually try to tell you? Because we have a few people who have lovely voices,
Right.
but man, are they cement blocks
Right.
on stage. You know, so you just kind of want to go, I mean, I'm not in charge, so it's not my call, but
Yeah.
it's like, how do you get them to move just a little bit?
I think that depends entirely on that person, on your relationship with that person. You know, I do all of my ministries built out of relationships. I really feel like you can't be effective and you're just going to seem like a big old meanie if you're just like, you look boring, you know, move, you know, you're moving too much. Come on. And then I'm out the door as soon as service is over. So I think you can encourage somebody to maybe loosen up a little bit. I find that a lot of times the reason that they are that way is for a particular reason. Either they don't feel comfortable in the song that they're leading, or they don't feel comfortable on stage. I've actually had a couple people who, after a few months, were just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was like, you don't have to. Like, I want you to enjoy what you're doing. And they're like, well, we need volunteers and we need singers, and I can sing. And I was like, don't feel like you have to. You know what I mean? So I think it a lot of times it just depends on the person, and approaching them, again, out of love and out of that relationship for them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So it's also difficult, too, when you're leading from guitar. I know You lead from the guitar. You lead from the guitar occasionally. I lead primarily from the piano. I think you do too, Jared. Do you? Okay. So when you're leading from the guitar, it's really easy sometimes to get really stuck in this space right here. You know what I mean? To really, especially when you have a stand in front of you, to think that, okay, I've got this beautiful little barrier, this wonderful wall that people can't get to me, and you get lost right here. And you just don't move from this space, and you look up and you sing your song. You might even smile occasionally, and then you go back and look down. Okay, cool. So and then you see the opposite. You see Mr. Rockstar, who's getting up there and he's shredding out, and he's all over the place. Do any of you have these people? No? Be grateful.
I don't think the second one exists.
Well,
Oh, yeah, it does.
so
Just not here.
just maybe not a
Just in
part-time.
rehearsals.
Yeah, and rehearsals. So and I find this interesting too. First of all, that it's mostly vocalists that even came to this, because a lot of times the people that are really your concrete blocks on stage are your instrumentalists. And of course, not your drummer; he can't move. But God bless our bass players. But almost every single bass player I know is. They never smile.
Part of the game.
They just stand right there. And it's important that they appear involved as well. Does that make sense? This is also tricky it's really tricky when leading from a piano. I do use a keyboard or an actual piano.
He's an actual piano.
I have a Jerry piano, yeah. So sometimes I've led from the keyboard where you're standing up, and it's a little bit easier to get into it, though this leg, it feels terrible because you're working your pedal with this foot the whole time, so you have to lean entirely on this thing. The problem with leading from the piano is that your entire body is hidden behind a hulking, it's huge. It's a huge thing. If you had this in your house, it would take up your whole house. So how do you then, and 9 times out of 10, your piano is not faced directly out towards
Correct.
the
You're
congregation.
sideways.
You're faced to the side. So how do you engage your congregation that way? I find that I have to sit like this. You face sitting out. You put your mic, I usually put my mic on this side so that if you want to move your hand, and I've done this before where you're talking and you want to talk and you go, and you knock the mic on the floor. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? The other thing that I do, and I don't know if you would want this, I use a stool usually. I don't usually use the bench. I kind of have long legs too, so that's helpful, and so it actually puts you a little bit higher so that you can see the congregation a little bit better. Because a lot of times, if you have the piano and your music up, broken piano, your music is here, and I don't know
It really
about
hides
you, but then all they're
From the
seeing.
people over there.
Yeah, all they're seeing is this much of your head of the person leading. So that is important as well. All right. So that's just a little bit on posture and movement and those kinds of things. So you want an open, confident posture. Next, I want to talk a little bit about facial expressions. Again, these things might seem small. They might seem really tedious. But they can make the difference between how someone feels about you leading worship. I really believe this. Have you all seen Grumpy Cat? Right, the thing online, the Grumpy Cat meme, where I'll show you later. It's just basically a picture of this cat that just looks perpetually grumpy, and so there's a meme that goes around of all different kinds of things. How many of you have a grumpy cat on your worship team? Any of you? Yeah. Yes. We had one at Milford, and I'll tell you. She was one of my favorite volunteers. She was one of the kindest, most generous people I have ever met in my life. She was a beautiful person, honestly. I love her dearly. And when she got up on stage, she was our grumpy cat. Because she played keys for us. Very serious. She played keys for us. And she had transitioned from being an organ player. Back in the day, she had started playing the organ. Now we mostly use keyboards, so she played keys for us. Well, when you play the organ, no one can see your face at all, usually, because your organ is too tall, and you're usually sitting far to one side, and it doesn't much matter what you look like. But when you play keys, I don't know about you, but we always had our keyboard standing up, usually facing out. And Debbie would always just play. She would never look up. She would look down. She just kind of had one of those resting grumpy cat faces. And she would just, and people thought, no joke, they thought, what is her deal? What is her problem? Why is she so mean? People would honestly not approach her because they thought she was a grumpy person, she was mean, and just because of the way she looked while she led worship. It wasn't anything that she even thought about. I had mentioned it to her a couple of times, and I think she just thought I was crazy or picking on her or something. I don't know. But because of the way she led worship, people thought she was mean. And unfortunately, whether I liked it or not, and no matter how talented she was, and she was incredibly talented, people would get that feeling when they came into our worship center because there was somebody up there. They looked past me, and I think sometimes the worship leader thinks, oh, they're all only looking at me. It doesn't matter what anybody else looks like. I will admit, I sometimes would get sucked into that because I'm egotistical and self-centered. But sometimes you think that, but they're looking at everyone on stage. They're looking at your screen, they're looking at you, they're looking at the old lady down the row, they're looking at the person coming in late. They're looking at everything, especially when they're new. So you really don't want to have a grumpy cat face. And this is, again, a difficult thing because everybody expresses differently. Everybody emotes differently. And there's no one right or wrong answer here. The important thing is to be in the moment and to be expressive with what you're doing. So as a singer, you have to know what you're singing. And you have to think about, how would I feel if I was expressing this to somebody for the first time? If you're singing How Great Is Our God, that's a song we all know. You wouldn't sing, How Great Is Our God, sing with me. You know what I mean? Like, you would sing it, how great. You want to emote that with how you feel. And whether you realize it or not, you express a lot in your eyes. My wife always tells me that she can tell exactly how I feel based on the way my eyes are. I can control, if I'm going to be in a meeting. I can control if I'm smiling or frowning or whatever. But she knows exactly when something makes me mad or pushes one of my buttons because that flash in my eyes. And people can tell that from you too. No matter how big your church is, no matter how big your room is, people can tell how you're feeling based on your eyes and where you're looking. So, where do you look? I get this question a lot. Where do I look, CJ? I don't know. The trick is always, you don't ever want to look someone dead in the face while you're singing. You don't want to look right at them and sing right at them, especially if they're new, because here's the tip. You're going to freak them out. And they're going to say, what did I do? What is this guy? Why is he staring me down? And this goes for everybody. So you don't ever want to look anybody right in the face for too long. You kind of want to keep scanning the room. Some of you are uncomfortable looking at the faces while you're singing. Do any of you get stage fright? Any of you? No? We're leaders, so we usually don't get much of that. But a lot of our vocalists on our vocal teams, they are scared to death of being on stage, honestly. They're doing it because they love singing, they love making music, they maybe even love practice and being part of the team. They don't love being on stage. What's the statistic that more people are scared of public speaking than of dying? So more people would rather die than be in front of people. So the trick is, I always say, look right above their heads. Does that make sense? Look right above their heads. In our previous worship center, it was kind of a weird room. The ceiling slanted down, and there was kind of a ceiling line and a big beam that ran all the way across the back of our room. And it was maybe a foot above everybody's head from where you were standing on the stage. And I say, just keep your eyes on that beam. Keep your eyes on where you're going. And keep kind of scanning the room and looking around. There's a couple things you don't want to do. How many of you have a cheat screen? A cheat word screen?
Yeah.
Yeah? How many of you catch yourself staring? Any of you? No? You're all good. You're the good ones. You're all the exception. There we go.
No, a different comment, though.
Yeah.
The ones we have at our church right now, and I've mentioned this a couple times, they're on monitors that are on the floor. They're actually below stage level. Mm-hmm. And anybody who needs to see those lyrics automatically looks down. Yep. Even if they keep their head up, their eyes go down. You know their eyes aren't closed, because it doesn't look like closed eyes, but you can't see them anymore.
Right.
So on a couple occasions I've said, we're remodeling our sanctuary right now. We've got a big place in the back where they can put a screen, and people can look at that position. They can look over the heads of the words.
That's our room at Northeast. We have stadium seating in the back of our room, so it's like flat for part of it, and the stadium seating like a movie theater in the back of our room. So there's literally no back wall more than like at the top of it. It's in the way back of our room. We couldn't put a screen there. So our screens are on the floor, right in front of the stage, and most people don't even know they're there. But you're right. You catch people kind of leaning over. What's that? I don't know. Or you'll catch we have a big back screen behind us, and they'll kind of just casually turn to the side, and So you have to be very careful about the words, and you don't want to get stuck on your screen. In Milford, we had a huge back screen. I hated it. I wanted to get rid of it, and I about had a mutiny, so I didn't. But we had a huge back screen, and I would have people that would just, I love them, great people, and they'd just sit and sing right at that screen, and it was a little bit elevated, so their chin was elevated, and people could tell that they were not singing with the congregation at all. And the other important thing, the other thing I always tell vocalists particularly, please do not take attendance. Okay? I know you care about the church. You care about the growth of your church. You know when a church is full, okay, we're going to have good attendance this Sunday. Everybody loves that. And you can tell when, oh boy, everyone must be on vacation this week. And you look around and say, oh, who's not here? Oh, they haven't been here in 2 weeks. Better call them. Oh, they haven't been here in 3 weeks. Oh boy. And then you notice the people. Does everyone show up on time for your church? No? Okay, good. So mine doesn't either. We have, at Northeast, there's a couple, and it's a girl I went to college with, and she and her husband go to our church. And I don't think I've ever seen them. We do communion right in the middle of the service. I've never seen them there before communion, ever. I'll be in the lobby or I'll be standing in the room, and then in comes Kelsey, 25 minutes late to church, every time. It's important that while you're on stage, you're not looking at those people and staring them down. I know this from a fact. My mom used to lead worship at my home church, and there would be occasions where I'd come waltzing into church 15, 20 minutes late, and my mom would be there on stage, and I could tell she'd been looking for me. Because, parents especially, you're looking for your kids. And she would catch my eye as soon as I entered the door, and she'd just stare me down as I came down the aisle and sat in my seat. So please be careful about where you're watching. Okay, we have, 5 minutes. So the last thing I want to talk about is what to do with your hands. And I've talked about this briefly, kind of over and over again. You just want to be careful, again, not to be distracting. If you're a very emotive person when you're singing or worshiping, feel free to do that. Watch where you're going. I have long arms, and I have to be careful that I literally don't hit people. It's just the curse I bear. And so you want to be careful you don't hit people. You be careful you don't want to, do this. Oh shoot, I forgot my hand out. Have any of you seen Tim Hawkins' video about hand worshiping?
Oh my gosh.
He's got several different things, and it's like the last one is like the field goal, and holding the big TV, widescreen TV, and like all these different things. I was going to bring a hand out. I'm really sorry I forgot to do that.
There's a shirt with those on it too.
Yeah, exactly. There's all sorts of them. The one-hander, the two-hander. Anyway.
Caught a big fish.
Yeah,
Caught a bigger fish.
bigger fish. Yeah. So they're pretty good. So we have 5 minutes left. I know I've given you a bunch of things. I hope I have talked about what you thought you were coming in here today. Do you all have any questions about just any of that I've talked about for me?
CJ, I would insert, what you're talking about is, these are like nitpicky things, right?
Yes.
So naturally, there's nothing wrong with somebody coming up, like your worship hand, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But you wouldn't go up and preach a sermon without any kind of preparation. You wouldn't go up and lead worship and just tell the band, just follow me, without a rehearsal or handing out chord charts beforehand, so that we all have some kind of preparation. And so really what you're talking about is preparation physically. How can we come in prepared to lead people?
Exactly. And it's all about next level. You know what I mean? We can all do things. Every church kind of has its I found its natural level that it is comfortable at. And then there are always things that you can do to take it to the next level, to make people that much less distracted. You know what I mean? To clear away just a few more barriers for the message of the gospel to come out. And like I said in the beginning, all of this comes from a heart of, we want to make sure that we are being clear. We want want to make sure that we are not wasting time. And we want to make sure, like Josh said, that we get that family who are only going to give us one chance, that we want to be as clear to them as we can possibly be. Because, I know, sometimes I hear stories like that and I think, well, there probably aren't that many families out there. But you know as well as I do, there are a lot of families out there. There are a lot of people hurting. There are a lot of people that know deep down inside that they need God and that they need a community of people to belong to. And if we're distracting, or if we're honestly weird in any way, people already think Christians are weird enough. We don't need to reinforce those stereotypes, at least from the stage. I'm sure the weird lady in the row will reinforce that for you. So, yeah.
Also, I was reading an article that said,
This is
whatever
my
you
class.
whatever you give from the stage, your congregation is going to give about half that back.
Mhm.
So, as we're talking about nitpicky things, I would say lean more towards charismatic. The more expressive you are, the more expressive you're going to get other people to be with you at half that level. So,
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. When I started at Milford for a long time had a tradition of being a very traditional church. In the 80s and 90s, they had a great guy, friend of mine, who was a worship leader, but he was a very traditional guy. Brass band, hymns and organ and all that. That isn't me. I mean, yeah, I can appreciate that kind of thing, but that is not me. I'm an expressive guy. I'm an expressive worship leader. I can barely stand still for more than like 30 seconds in one place. So, when I first started there, I had come from a church that I was interning at that was very expressive. So I got up there, it's good to see you here, raising my hands and all this. And they just kind of stared back at me for like probably 2 years. I'm not even joking. I was there for 5. And for probably the first 2 years, they kind of just said, oh boy, here goes CJ again. He's staring back at me. But slowly, as I was there, the culture began to change. And that congregation became more expressive. And our worship times became more rich because they were more willing to react that way. That isn't because of only me. I'm not saying that. But it was because, as the leader, I was expressing that from the stage. I agree with you, Dan.
Our choir was a lot like that.
Uh-huh.
And we went through a study I was telling Linda about called The Unquenchable Worshiper. Matt Redman changed the whole spirit of that group. And with that change in the spirit of the group, it changed our sound. And they were notorious for just standing and singing. And I was like, if we truly believe in the God that we serve, there's got to be something here. You may not be a hand raiser. My dad can't clap and sing at the same time, but he has a great voice. But he smiles when he sings. So even if it's not here, it's here. And what I told them was, whatever you do on stage gives them permission to do that out there. Because there's a lot of people out there going, well, if they're not doing that on the stage, then I'm not going to do that here. And the more that the people that were leading on stage in that choir or on praise teams found freedom in their worship, I mean, we're still moving with it, but light years from where we were almost 4 years ago.
Yep.
Just you will see a hand raise over here, or I like eyes closed sometimes, but people will close eyes and you can see them in the moment, or whatever it is. But it's been so freeing for so many, but the permission to do that comes from the stage in a lot of people's minds.
And that reminds me of one more thing, and I didn't get to it, and I said I'd get to it, about the eyes closed. I really have a feeling that if you're legitimately feeling in the moment, you can close your eyes as the worship leader. You want to be very careful and be conscious that you're closing your eyes and then open them back up. I know people that you never close your eyes. Don't ever close your eyes. You're distracted. And I know people that get up there and the first thing you do, and that's fine. That's their way for worshiping. But my rule is only when you're really feeling it. That's my feeling. That's my feeling as the worship leader. But it can be distracting. We're out of time. Let me pray for you, and then we'll go. God, I thank you for this group of leaders in this room. I thank you for their heart, for wanting to be better worship leaders. Father, I pray that what we've talked about today is helpful, and that it will help them to be more clear in their message of your hope and your love for us. Father, I pray that you'll bless each and every church that is represented in this room, God, that it would be a place of healing and of love and of compassion. Father, we thank you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you, guys.
So you're like, yeah, that is annoying, isn't it?
Oh, we do have a little break.
Yeah, we have like 10 minutes, I think, to get to your next, wherever it is you're going.
Normally it's freezing
Is
on
it?
Sunday morning. They don't have the full air up and running.
So do you have a building?
I'm telling you, it is a game changer. I can't speak about it. We did, in fact, we did it for our whole worship ministry. It was my praise team, my band members, my tech members, everybody read through it together. We made a covenant on
I really need to meditate about that.
No, it's like, it looks like a gift set. I mean, it's such an easy read. Such an easy read. Yes.
I was gonna ask this, like,
ChristianBook.com may have them at a discounted price. A lot of times if you order a book
because I feel like
in bulk from there, then ChristianBook.com.
that's a bad thing. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I'm like that. All these stuff in my head.
I know, and even like the way they talk.
I'm just like,
Yeah.
But it's, what do you play? Do you play music for the people going out, or do you play music for the people coming in?
It was some of each. I mean, we've got, what, 20, 30 minutes? The
Well,
first 15 minutes,
theoretically.
well, the first 10 minutes, you can play things that next one, and the next 10 minutes you can, or
Right.
you leave 5 minutes open, and then the next 10 minutes you
Mhm.
play things that are off.
I have handouts
Okay.
for you. You'll be down
This is the
here.
room that I'm in, so just leave them on the Diana.
What all do you need? Like I was gonna bring down the gray keyboard.
Okay.
Is this still going?
Um,